Testing 1, 2, 3. Hey Yash, how you doing? Glad you could join me. Can you hear me okay? Awesome, good to hear. We'll give it a few seconds. I'm not sure how many people are going to be able to join on a Friday. Unfortunately, I had to move it. It's not the best time to have this meeting. Wish I could have had it on a Tuesday this week. So it'll be recorded and people can watch. Now let's see how many people we get. Hopefully get some sort of quorum. Hi, Chris. Glad you could join us. We're just going to wait a few moments and see how many people we can get on a Friday after moving it. I'm expect a lot of people have emailed me or messaged me in Teams and said they won't be able to make it, but they'll watch remote. The good thing is this isn't going to be a long class. We'll probably be out of here, and I would be surprised if it lasts 1 hour. And so it's a really short class on a Friday. Not too bad. Stick with me. We're going to go over some of the practical exam assignment. And we're going to go over some stuff that's like firewall D and network control stuff. Give it about 1 more minute and we'll get started. Okay, let's get started. The class is recorded, so anyone who's joining in late or can't join today can definitely check out everything. They're not going to miss anything. So, without further ado, let's get this show on the road. Let me just turn off the lights here. 1 second. Some ambient light coming in, shining. Okay, welcome everyone to NETS 1028. Linux System Security. Again, my name is Ryan Clements, and it's always a pleasure to teach you, and I really look forward to these classes. Unfortunately, sometimes weeks get crazy, and we have to move things around, so I do really appreciate everyone being very flexible there. And so we are going to talk about network access control today, and this is going to be part 1. It's going to be a very short class. It's not going to be a very long class at all. We're going to talk mostly, we're going to introduce this, the firewall, the main software firewall for CentOS and RHEL, which is Firewall D. And I'm just going to, while I'm talking, I'm going to clean off the screen here. Old stuff from my last class. We're talking about ARP attacks and man-in-the-middle attacks and all that fun stuff. You can actually, if you want to, you can look at my Comp 2103 class, which was yesterday, and it shows you how to do man-in-the-middle attacks and everything. And that stuff is all in my live YouTube recordings. You can check out my other class if that interests you. Really cool stuff. We weren't doing it on CentOS. We were doing it on Kali Linux. But really, really neat stuff to know how this stuff works and how easy it is to be hacked on a network. And I guess it really opens people's eyes, and they don't really realize how easy some of these hacks are to perform. And to be a really good security guy, you need to know You need to know how the hacks are done so you can protect yourself and the company. Okay, there we go. Cool, I think we're done. Okay. All right, well, let's get started. Overview of this class. This is a short class. This is not a long class. We're going to be out of here in we're going to be out here in less than an hour. It's not going to be a 3-hour class. It's a Friday. Don't worry about that. We're going to talk briefly. I'm going to introduce Firewall D. And so some of you guys might already understand what Firewall D is. That's okay if you don't. We're going to take you from step 1 like I always do. And then we're going to talk about Firewall D zones and how Firewall D works. Then we're going to talk about the Firewall D services. And then we're going to discuss the practical exam portion, which I promised you a week or so ago, and it never ended up showing up. So I wanted to take a class and really just discuss this with you and go over it rather than just fire it out there. So that's why I delayed it. We'll get 2 weeks to do it. Don't worry about that. And the good thing is you don't have an assignment in this class this week. We're only going to give you the practical assignment, which is your 20% of your mark, and I'm going to let you just work at it, okay? So there's no extra assignment besides this today, and this is the 20% from your mid. We'll talk about that right at the end, okay? But let's just get through this class and talk about Firewall D, which is the main firewall for CentOS Linux. Now, Firewall D is primarily a network firewall on CentOS and is the primary network firewall for CentOS 8 and RHEL 8. The D at the end stands for daemon, which daemon means it's a service. It's always running in the background there, waiting and listening to requests. It's easy to understand. So I don't know if a lot of you have, has anyone here, I know some of you have, and you'll probably pipe up. Has anyone here worked with Linux before Firewall D was the main firewall? Do you guys know which firewall Linux used before Firewall D became the primary one? So firewall, what am I doing here? My brain's going too fast and my hand hasn't caught up. Firewall D, okay? So before Firewall D, we had something called IP tables, this right here. And if you look back at like RHEL or CentOS 5 and 6, and a lot of Ubuntu and stuff like that, IP tables was the primary firewall. And it was very complex. You literally, if you knew IP tables, you were like a genius or something, because these rules were really complex. They were hard, okay? It was really configurable. And if you were a genius in IP tables, you looked at someone's firewall rules and you're like, that's amazing how you put all that together. In RHEL 7, Firewall D came around, okay, on RHEL 7. We're up to RHEL 8 now. Firewall D came around and everyone was like, whoa, this is so radical and new. And a lot of people hated it, just like System D and stuff. And then people started really liking it because they started to realize that to create a firewall rule, it became so easy to do with Firewall D. And behind the scenes on RHEL 7, Red Hat 7 or CentOS 7, it still used IP tables. So Firewall D would just be the interface for IP tables, and we configure IP tables for you and stuff like that. In RHEL 8, that's changed more. Now we're using something called NetFilter and NetFilter tables, and it's using that instead of IP tables now. But you really don't need to understand how all that works to really understand Firewall D. All you need to know is Firewall D is a really simple command that you can use. It's a great firewall for Linux. It looks very simple on the surface, and it is once you learn how it works. But it also allows you to get into stuff like really rich rules. And what I mean by rich rules is then it starts to get a little more complex. So I would say about 90% of the stuff you can do in Firewall D is very simple and straightforward, unlike IP tables. The next 10%, the really complex things you need to do, you can still do with Firewall D, but it requires these things called rich rules, which we're not going to introduce in this class. We'll get into it in next class. but I just wanted to give you a kind of an overview on what Firewall D is and where we're going with it. Firewall D is a little different than IP tables. IP tables used to use something called chains, and we used to call them like chains, and used to chain one network to one set of network rules to another, and it was very complex, and a lot of people didn't quite understand it. Well, Firewall D uses a concept named zones to simplify where network traffic goes. And so here is how a Firewall D zone selection logic works. So when you first look at this might all be very abstract and everything, and I don't want this to confuse you because it really is simple. Before I even explain this whole thing, I'm going to tell you all the time it uses 99% of the time you're using the default zone anyways, okay? So all of this stuff, I mean, yes, I'm trying to teach you how it selects a zone, but 99% of the time you're going to be using the default zone. So don't worry too much about all this zone logic, okay? But let's just go ahead and discuss it so at least you understand how it works, and if you ever have to use a different zone, which there are lots of times you do, but again, like I said, in practical implementation on a single server, most of the time you're using one zone anyway. What happens is you get a network packet coming into the firewall, and we have to choose a zone, and these zones are called like public or internal or external or DMZ or whatever. And it has all these default zones in Firewall D that it can choose from. And each zone contains its own rules. So when a network packet comes in, it examines the source, where the source is from. So I'm just using 8888 as a, Google's DNS, just kind of pick on that all the time. So if a source from 8888 was coming into the firewall D would first look at the zones that are currently configured. So like internal, public, DMZ, all that stuff, which we'll get into in a sec. And it's going to look through all those zones and see if that source address or the source network that maybe 8000/24 or whatever, or 888.0/24 is configured to use a certain zone or a certain type of rules, then it will use that zone specifically depending on what the source address is. If there's no source address configured to a certain zone, basically, should this source address go through a certain set of zone rules, right? If none of that exists, which typically it doesn't, it goes no, and then it looks at the network interface. You know how like you have ENS33 on CentOS, and that's the network interface? The network interface, or like, how you guys would know an F0 for, older installs for Linux, S0, E, and S33, those different network interfaces can be assigned to zones specifically as well. So you can assign ENS33 to zone public if you want, and then the public zone will be used. Typically, those are not applied right away either, so that defaults to no as well, and it goes ahead and uses the default zone anyway. And the default zone is the public zone that it's always set up on every install. And I see most of the time, even in corporate environments, everyone just keeps the public zone and they don't change public to like internal or anything like that. I mean, some people do, some people don't. But it really, if it's just a firewall on a single VM and there's like a larger firewall inside the corporation, like a Cisco firewall or whatnot, controlling all the ingress traffic from external internet. Typically, the firewalls on the actual VMs aren't too complex, so they just they just call it a public zone and put all the rules in there. So most of the time, you're going to be using the default zone, which is the public zone. So down here, source address of ingress packets, and when I say ingress, I mean inbound packets. Ingress means inbound, and egress means outbound. They're examined, right? And then, so basically assigned to the default zone if no associated zone via source IP or network interface, okay? So typically 99% of the time you're going to be using. Okay, yeah, I will check my email, sure. No I think I saw your email. Yeah, I've been really busy today, and I think something came in with an urgent, so I will check it again, okay? We'll talk. Thanks, bud. Okay, so So zones, all they do is allow or deny traffic. And I'm going to show a picture on the next slide anyways, describing what I'm saying here. So I just wanted to get it out with words first. Zones permit traffic if a port or protocol matches a list of defined rules. So inside a zone, you can think of a zone as just a list of rules. And inside those zones, the way we list rules is saying, hey, any source address that comes in to this zone can connect to TCP/22. And if TCP/22, the port and the protocol is defined in that zone, then it allows the traffic through. If it's not allowed in the zone, like TCP/22, and TCP/22 that port protocol comes into that zone as a request, the zone will deny any port or protocol that's not specifically defined in that zone. The exception is something called the trusted zone, which that's the default zone as well. And if you use the trusted zone, it permits all traffic regardless if there's a port or protocol defined in that zone. So, for example, you could assign, let's say you had two machines that needed to talk to each other inside a VLAN or something. And you wanted no firewall in between these whatsoever. You could put that IP of that trusted other computer in that VLAN in the trusted zone there, and then anything that comes in from that IP would go to the trusted zone. You wouldn't have to say, yeah, port 22, yeah, port 80, it'll just accept everything. So it's basically like no firewall at all. If you put an IP in the trusted zone, that packet coming in from that IP will just get accepted no matter what. It will skip all the other zones and just be trusted automatically. So here's what I'm talking about. So here's an example of traffic moving through a zone. You have a network packet coming into the firewall. The firewall has to make a decision. Okay, so the zone selection logic is not here, right? This what I had here, the zone selection, we're just assuming the zone has already been selected in this next slide, okay? So zone's already been selected here. I just didn't put it for complexity. So once we already have the zone, we're examining that zone to see if that port protocol that's coming in, that this network packet wants to connect to, let's say TCP/22, which is SSH, is defined in this zone list. If it's not, it denies traffic, and it just doesn't allow that packet to connect to the VM. If it is defined TCP/22, it will allow that packet to create a connection to that port 22 TCP or whatever port it's trying to connect to. So here's a real example of a zone of moving through a packet moving through a zone. So I just took a source and destination. These mean nothing. But what I highlighted is the point. There's a part what we're looking at. Imagine if the packet came in and said, I want it from the outside world. I want to connect to port 22 TCP. It goes to the firewall D. Firewall D makes this decision. It says, okay, well, let's have a look at what ports and protocols are available in this zone list. All right, we're allowed TCP/22. We're allowed TCP/53, which is DNS, or UDP 2002. That's just a random number I picked. Put a UDP port in there, okay? It goes down this list. It says, does TCP/22 exist in this list? And it does. So yes, it allows traffic. If TCP/22 was not defined in this zone allow list, then it would be denied by default. That's how Firewall D works. Okay, so I remember I talked about some predefined zones before. Well, here they are. And I highlighted the public one in green because that's typically what's default and what's always going to be used. You only start to get in some of these other zones if you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty and detailed on Firewall D. If you had like many different network cards coming in, or even so, you could have you could even assign different IPs to different zones. So you could say if it's coming in through this IP, it's going to be external. If it's coming through this IP, it's going to be going to the DMZ portion. I'm sorry. So all these 6 up here all kind of work in the same fashion. They're all default. They're all created by default by CentOS by default for you already. So they're already going to exist. But CentOS is using the public one as the default. So that's what you're using unless you switch to one or the other. The trusted zone is also there, and that's a special zone allowing all incoming traffic, okay? The block zone is also another special zone, and if you assign something to the block zone, it rejects all incoming traffic regardless, and that's only new incoming traffic. Yash, that's a great question. I'll get to that in a sec. So, and you see what I'm saying? All new incoming traffic. The word is new incoming traffic, okay? And even new incoming traffic. Do you guys know how a TCP connection works? Just put in the chat yes or no. If no, I'll explain it on the board here. So you kind of get an idea of what's going on. Like, do you know how the handshaking works and stuff? The SYN in the ACK and all that stuff that goes on? Okay, Chris does. Chris, I know you've had previous experience. Okay, Sahaj, no. So I'm assuming there's some other people. Okay, Yash, okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and explain it just so we're all in the same boat here. So a TCP connection works like this, okay? So this is only for TCP. This is not for UDP, ICMP, or whatever. So a TCP connection works like this. You have the source, and you have the destination. And so what happens is when they want to connect, they have to do a handshake, okay? So a TCP connection is connection-based, which basically means for them to start sharing data, they need to agree to connect both to each other. They say, I want to connect you, and the destination says, sure, let's connect, and away they go. With UDP, that's not the case. The source just starts sending the destination some information. There's no handshaking or anything. It just spams it out, and if the destination accepts it, it accepts it. With TCP, they need to do something called a handshake. Okay, there needs to be a handshaking. I'm going to show you the handshaking with my really crappy drawing here. So the first thing that happens is the source connects to the destination. And it says, you know, it might be going to TCP port 22, whatever, right? And it's trying to connect to port 22 over here, right? So it's saying, I'd like to connect to port 22. And the first thing that it does is it has a TCP packet that comes over to the destination. And in here, there's a number of flags that it's sending. It's sending something called, I'm going to do this in a different color. It sends a SYN flag in the TCP header, and it puts a SYN flag to 1. And it turns that bit on, and it says SYN, which basically means connect. I would like to connect. So the destination has to respond now. So the destination sends another packet back saying, yes, I would like to connect. So it goes, remember, SYN means connect. So it goes, yes, I would like to connect. So SYN equals 1. And it says ACK, and it sends another bit on. It says, I'm acknowledging your connection attempt. And so what's happening here is basically like, and here's my really crappy drawing. The first packet is saying, here's my hand. I would like to perform a handshake with you, because to start something, a handshake takes 2 hands, right? I can't just stick out my hand and say, hey, hello, I'd like to set up a connection. If there's no response, then the connection doesn't get set up. And this SYN ACK back here is basically like the other hand coming this way. Uh-oh, I missed the thumb. There. It was an amputee. We put it back on. Don't worry. So what we're having now here is that the SYN is sent, ACK is sent backwards, and they're shaking hands, and they're saying, yes, I would like to connect. This right here, find the right color here. Got green? Okay, I'll do it in green. This right here, this first connection, is this whole thing, this first SYN and ACK is considered a new connection. This whole thing, this whole process, that's a new connection, okay? So new connections are when there's a first connection, a first SYN and a SYN ACK. Anything that happens after that is considered not a sustained connection. Geez, what's the word? Um, oh, I can't remember the word. Just slipped my head. Um, Anyways, it's not a new connection. It's already, they're sending data down here, and data gets sent now, right? Um, It'll come to me in a sec. So now they can all send data back and forth. So when I'm saying only new connections, it's only this first SYN and ACK. After that, they can choose whatever port they want, because this is not a new connection. A TCP connection has a state information. It remembers this connection has already been made. So now they can choose ephemeral ports way up there and make those connections all over the place. And so going back to this over here, let's put this back up here. Going back to this, when I say only new connections, only new incoming traffic will be blocked from here. That means no new TCP connections and stuff like that. No connections that haven't already been in a sustained state. So that's what that means. I'll explain that a little better and a little more in the next class. But that's pretty much what I mean. It's that, only all new incoming traffic will be established. There you go, Yash. Thank you very much. There you go. You can come up. You know what, Yash, if we were in class, I would have you come up to the top of the class and you can co-teach with me. That's great. Thank you very much. So, okay, so we talked about the predefined zones, and those are the predefined zones that are in Firewall D. We're going to talk a little bit about the predefined services now. There are predefined services in Firewall D as well that are already set up when you install Firewall D. And the first one, which is pretty understandable, SSH is set up by default. And I highlighted this in green because that's really the only one you're worried about here. All the other ones you're not using. Okay. Remember how you could SSH into your machines as soon as you set them up and you got in through Xshell and you didn't have to touch the firewall at all? Well, guess what? Firewall D is up and running. But you never actually had to add in these SSH TCP 22 because that was already added in for you, because CentOS figures that once you set up your server, you're probably going to want to SSH into it. You don't want to fiddle with the firewall because everyone's going to want to SSH. No one wants to use the VMware console. That's like just, who wants to use the VMware console? That's terrible. So these other ones are also set up by default, and depending on what zone you're in, they might be enabled or disabled. Like the IPP client will be enabled in the local zone and stuff like that. But again, you're probably not using this anyways. Samba client for Windows sharing is a service that's already set up and predefined. But again, you won't be using a lot of these, okay? The only one, I just want to make you aware that they are already in some zones. So depending on what zone you're in, these already might be enabled for you and allowing traffic. The firewall command, okay, this is how you actually look at your firewall. So you use the command firewall -command, and you could use the space dash list dash all, and it will show you, this is the main command that you want to use a lot of the times to see what kind of state the firewall is in. And you can see here it's using the public by default, and that yours is going to be the same. Zone, that's the zone right there. And inside the public zone, it already put Cockpit in there for you if you installed Cockpit, which you should have. And you can see SSH as well. Now, depending on your network, you might be using DHCP version 6, but I'm assuming most people aren't. You're using DHCP version 4. But depending on what VMware is using there, and you might be using, but I'm assuming not. So, but you can see how if you installed Cockpit in one of our previous assignments, it already put Cockpit service in there for you. And the way that these zone files work is that it wants to make sure, it says, first of all, it's saying, okay, this is the default target. This is where most stuff's going to go if it does not fall into another zone. It's going to go into the public zone. The interface it's tied to is ENS33. That's the main network interface. And the services that are allowed right now, it's allowed Cockpit, which is TCP 9090, DHCP v6 client, and SSH, which is TCP/22. Ports and protocols, there's nothing here. Huh. Well, Ryan, you said that ports and protocols had to be set up. Well, yes, they are. But they're actually set up through an XML file in Cockpit XML, which they created a service for. So in the next class, we're going to look at the Cockpit XML and show you how the TCP port is set up for that in SSH, and they called it a service instead of like called the port and protocol specifically out. Now, you can do either or. If you removed the SSH service, you could say port TCP, support 22 and protocol TCP. And you could put those here, and it would allow you to find the actual TCP/22 down here as well. You could either make it a service XML file and add it as a service, or you can explicitly define it, and Firewall D will allow that traffic to pass. Another thing that most of these stuff we don't really have to worry about too much. We're going to briefly look at forward ports, but we're also going to look at rich rules as well. And so you can see that this firewall is very simple. It allows a port and a protocol to connect. And the way that it's looking at the source is that sources are tied to different zones. But there's sometimes where we need to start looking at the flags and weird stuff inside those packets, and we can do those with rich rules. So we're going to get into that next class. I didn't want to get into this class because it's a Friday, and we also have to talk about the assignment. But I just wanted to kind of briefly touch on all this and give you an idea of what Firewall D is to set you up for success for the next class. Last slide. Cockpit can also manage Firewall D. Can you believe it? Lovely, lovely. Yes, Linux and Red Hat has done us a solid here, because doing it this way can get rather complex and really upset some people, because some of these Firewall D commands here can get rather complex, especially when we use rich rules and stuff. I want you to learn how to do it by the command line, because not a lot of places will allow Cockpit to be used. This is like an extra thing that maybe some places aren't going to allow you to use Cockpit. Maybe some will. If you are setting up your own server, or if you're the administrator setting up a server, you get to decide, and you'll probably put Cockpit on. But if you're in a big data center with thousands of servers, most likely they will not have Cockpit here. So even though that it's awesome and you can configure stuff using this, you can't always depend on it, okay? I'm going to show you both ways in the next class, and you're going to get experience with both. Okay, that is it. It's a really short class. I only wanted to make it about 30 minutes today because I didn't want to load you down with this and everything else you guys got going on. Next class is going to be a full class, but I want you to practice all commands and concepts presented in this class, which were basically hardly anything. I was just introducing you to Firewall D. I wanted you to get used to it. All guided and guided assignments, there's none. There's no assignment for this week. Work on midterm assessment project, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then I'm going to get a drink of water and eat a snack here. I've been go since 8. And then once we come back, we're going to get right into the midterm assessment project, and I'm going to go through it with you, okay? And practice, practice, practice. You need. All right, so that said, I'm going to bring up the midterm project here. I'm going to put it in front of you, and then I'm going to take a 10-minute break. So bring it over here. Unminimize. Voila. And here it is. Okay. And so I'm going to go over this and everything, but I'm going to leave it on the break. I'm going to leave it right here. This is already posted to the assignment section. And I'm going to take a 10-minute break. So we'll be back at, I guess, 5:40, 8-minute break. And then I'm going to start going over this whole assignment with you. Okay, so see you back in about 8 minutes. Okay, I'm back. All right, let's go over this and go over the assignment and talk about what this is all about. Now, I know I promised this a week or so ago, and it didn't pop up, but I wanted to go over it with you guys and have some time to do so, and you never really had that time. So you will have 2 weeks from today to get it done, and it's already in the assignment section. So you have, I think, till November 25th, 26th, till the end of the day on November 26th. So 2 weeks, lots of time. And I'm not even giving you assignment this week. So all you get to work on is this. Okay. And so you don't have to worry about any. Next week, there's going to be assignment. It's not going to be too tough. And you're also going to get 2 weeks to do the assignment next week. So the assignment that you get next week won't be due until the 3rd. So I'm not jamming everything down on you guys on 1 week. So don't worry about that. Okay. And that's why this class was very short. Wanted to give you time to work on this if you wanted tonight. I don't think anyone's going to do that on a Friday night. I wouldn't. But at least you're going to have a good Friday and a nice week. And then you can look at working on this on the weekend or whenever you want. This is the practical portion of the midterm. And I told you I didn't want to make the whole midterm the whole 30% of your mark, because I don't agree with doing a written assessment for Linux and having that be your full mark. I think that's unrealistic for the real world. So you're going to have two weeks to complete this. It'll be worth 20% of your final mark. You're going to make a completely new virtual machine. So it's not going to be the current virtual machines that you've been using up until now. Okay, so this is going to be a full new CentOS minimal install. When you're complete, you're going to zip up all the virtual machine files in the directory and send them to me as part of your submission. Now, I'm just creating an AWS SFTP server because I don't think we can. I don't think we can upload it to Georgian College. I don't think they're going to allow you to upload like half a gig or something. I have no idea. I'll test it. But by next class, I'll tell you where you can upload it. And then so what it's going to happen is that it's going to be marked automatically by a script that I've created. So I have created a script that's going to go through all these tasks to make sure that you set up the machine correctly. If you passed one of the tasks, you get full marks for it. If it doesn't work, you get 0 marks for it. But there's like 17 different tasks, or 13 different tasks, or whatever it is. So you can mess up one and the other one can work. But a lot of these tasks depend on each other. So if my script goes through and it's out of 200 marks, and it comes back and it says, no, Yash got 20 marks. I'd be like, hold on a second. Yash wouldn't get only 20 marks out of 200. I've seen Yash's assignment. They're fantastic. So, I'll go in there and double check to make sure that the script just didn't give you some random mark and my script failed or something. Okay, so don't freak out about that. When I've done this in the past, the scripts have always been right on the mark. Everyone's done great. Don't worry too much about this. It just makes it a little easier for me to mark and allows it to be constant across the board. So you're getting a great mark. Everyone's getting marked the exact same way. So what's going to happen is you upload the VM to me. I download your VM. I run the script on the VM, and the script comes back with a mark and tells me what you got wrong and what you got right. And if it looks really wrong for some reason, I'm going to go in there manually and have a look to see if maybe you did it differently or something. But try to do it the way that you've been taught, because that's the way I'm going to be marking. Secondly, you're required to create a Word document that details every step you performed, including screenshots if you feel they're required. I'm not going to make it 100% that you need to include screenshots. If it's a small step and you don't feel the screenshots are required, don't worry about it. Treat this documentation as if you were doing this for an actual company. And someone else on your team would be able to come and look at your documentation and say, sure, I understand how Lily did this. That makes sense. And so when I'm trying to train you, This isn't just like a course. I'm trying to train you on how I would like, you to work under me even, right? I would say, go ahead, Lily, create this server, and I want you to document the process. So Sahaj can come in later and configure the same server if you're on vacation, or Chris or Yash or anyone else, right? Um, and so that's what I'm trying to train you on how to do. So when you go into a corporation and you're doing these things for a corporation, even if you're not setting up servers, maybe you're just in a security ops or cybersecurity portion, you're still going to have to document your steps. And I want you to document this not as if you're documenting it for me, the professor, but documenting it for a corporation or a boss, right? So I'm going to leave it up to you to feel that if another team member came in and was going to follow your documentation, what you think that team member needs to know to build the same server. That's what you need to think when you're documenting this. So if you feel that you need to include a screenshot to describe what you're trying to say, include the screenshot. If you think it's straightforward enough, then it's straightforward enough. I'll leave it up to you. So once this is complete, ensure that the VM that you create here is saved, and don't modify it. Create a clone, create a snapshot, whatever. But we're going to come back to this as we start learning new concepts throughout this course. And for your midterm assessment, you're going to have that like in a few weeks before the midterm. Obviously, I'll give it to you. I'm just going to say these are the things that needed to be added to this VM. And then over at the end of the course, I'm going to take that final VM and see that you've done everything, right? And everything is set up correctly. If you're in a corporation, would this pass in a corporation, in a corporate environment? Would this be secure enough? Would I allow this to run in our production environment in our corporation, right? So just those things, right? And yes, I understand we're students and it's not going to be perfect. I'm not marking you for perfection. I'm marking you that you follow the directions as well as possible, and that you tried your best, right? It's not going to be like, oh well, I would not put this in a corporate environment and give you 0. Of course not, right? The idea is to learn, and this is a learning experience. Okay, so the situation overview is you're a junior security professional for a company named ABC Inc. The company needs you to build a new file sharing Linux server for several teams to share data, and 90% of the company you already uses Linux for their desktop machines. So Lily asks, so may we be using this new VM in the final? Yes. Not in the final, like in the final written exam, you won't be using this VM. But I'm going to give you the practical exam 2 weeks before, this kind of thing again. I'm going to give you another one of these, but then, you're going to be using the same VM that you built for the midterm and then adding on some more tasks to it, like configuring PAM, like we talked about last week, and AID and SE Linux and stuff like that. So, and I'm going to get you to set up a web server on it and stuff, and lock down that web server. So, and configure firewall D. And so those are just some other things that are going to come up. And so you're going to take this VM that you build this time, and then so when you get the final practical, you're going to use the same VM, but just add on all those extra things that you learned. So this VM in the end will be a file sharing server and a web server and a few other things, right? But it's all going to be all those lessons that you've learned, all those security lessons that you learned, so that will be a secure file server, a secure web server, and all that stuff. Now, in the real world, we really wouldn't put a file server and a web server on the same machine. That's just bad practice. But instead of making you make another VM or something like that, we're just going to put 2 services on the same machine. Yeah, do a snapshot, make a clone, whatever. So I'm working in a Mac environment. Do I export the VM to OVA? Yeah, that's fine. Chris? I'm very versed in VMware. Anything you can give me is fine. You can export it to an OVA. That's fine for me. However you want. I'm going to give you more instructions on how to zip it up or create an OVA, and then where to put it. I'll probably make you upload to an AWS SFTP or something, and I'll give you those instructions next week. Okay, so don't worry about that now. Just worry about configuring the VM. But yeah, Chris, whatever you want to give me, OVA, VMDKs, I'm good. Okay, so the situation is you're working for this company and they want you to set up a file share. 90% of the company already uses Linux for their machine. So they decided that the easiest way is they're going to use SSH, SFTP, and SCP to share files inside their company. Now, you know how to use the man pages. So if any of these commands, and we've used these commands throughout this course, but if any of these commands are, oops, I bolded that for some reason. If any of these commands are unfamiliar to you, you can use the man pages or whatnot. But I'll quickly go over them. SSH, you can connect to the server. Obviously, you can always you can do commands and copy commands using SSH as well. Believe it or not, and on a one-liner. SFTP uses SSH, but it's like it transfers files back and forth, and SCP copies files back and forth. So basically, it's a really rudimentary file share program server, but it's all using basic Linux commands. Because of many of these files are sensitive in nature, your boss has asked the new rising star. Any of you guys? I don't know why there's two spaces there. Security professional to provision and configure the Linux server. Now, if you guys are in cybersecurity, most of the time you're not going to be provisioning Linux servers. But who knows? You might be. There's some guys in our SecOps who will provision a server and everything. But most of the time, SecOps or security operations, they just look at policies, make sure everything's secure on the Linux server, make sure that the services are secure and whatnot. So, but configuring the server and configuring it from the ground zero gives you guys really good insight on how Linux administrators work, right? So SSH is okay. I'm just explaining a whole bunch of stuff here. So SSH is the command that Eggshell uses. You want to make sure that you're using SSH keys. So go through all the assignments on how we set up that server and basically follow the same fashion, right? You're basically redoing all the assignments, but on one server to set it up with one objective. When your boss asked which Linux distribution to use, they probably said Ubuntu or something or whatever, and you came back and you said, no, this crazy guy, Ryan Clements, one of the worst professors I've ever had, he always said use CentOS, well, not CentOS, use Red Hat, okay? But since we're not using Red Hat in this, we're using CentOS 8, which is the CentOS 8 Streams, which is the new kind of upstream for Red Hat, which we shouldn't really use in a production environment, but it clones Red Hat 8 anyway. So in reality, you'd be wanting to use Red Hat 8. Or you could use CentOS 8, you really could. But anyways, you're using Red Hat 8 here, to make a long story short. Typically, you'd want to use RHEL here. I'm just saying, you'd want to use RHEL in a corporate environment because there's a whole bunch of reasons. It's supported, it's backported. You're not, getting new updates every day. Red Hat puts a lot of effort. They have teams of hundreds of engineers putting effort to make sure that if there's any security problems, they backport those into the lifecycle, into the version you're using. So using Red Hat Linux for a corporation is the gold standard. You don't really want to use CentOS unless your boss really doesn't want to spend money. But I'll tell you, as security professionals, if you go into a corporation and they're all using CentOS, you can hold your nose up high and say, that's the wrong way to do things. You have to be using a supported product like Red Hat in a corporate environment to be really secure, okay? If you go in and they're using CentOS or Ubuntu everywhere, and they're asking you for your opinions, as a junior, you don't want to come in there and flip the table over, obviously, right? But if they really corner you and ask you for your opinion, say, why aren't we using Red Hat? And if they say because of money and licensing, and start saying, well, what about security? Red Hat has a lot better security. Red Hat is a supported product. Red Hat, is just the way to go to protect your business, right? But anyways, again, we're using CentOS 8. So your boss has emailed you a table with consists of the teams and people who want to require access to the files on the file server, along with some special permission requests. So this is the email that your boss sent you. He said, he or she said, we got to create these teams, and these are the people inside the team. So, I mean, if you've been following along, you can already think this is the group that I have to create, and these are the people I have to add to the group, right? So add group, add user, add these users to this supplementary group, just start thinking of it that way, right? I don't think it's news to anyone how this needs to be set up there. And then there's some special, this is still part of the email here, right? All this is part of the email that he sent you, or he or she sent you. So they also said, security team must be able to access everyone's files for security reasons. So a security team should be able to read and write files in all of these directories here that you set up. And the accounting team must be able to read, to be able to access the sales and administrative team's files. This means the accounting team should be able to read and write files in the following directories, and so on. And it just keeps going down and down and down here. So I want you to look over this email from your boss and dissect it, try to figure it out in your head. You might want to spin up another VM to practice on it before you actually start trying to set up all the security and all the permissions on your actual VM project. So, you can always make a clone of your current VM and try it on that, see if it works. If it works, implement what you did on your final assessment, right? And what I would suggest too is, as you're going through this, make snapshots or clones of it. So once we figure you got something all figured out, make a snapshot or a clone of it, and then continue on to the next part. So if you screw up the next part and you're like, I don't know what I did, it's all messed up now, you can always revert to the snapshot or go back to another clone or something. And that's typically how we work in a real environment. If we are setting up a server and we're pretty confident we got, a certain portion of that server fully complete, we make a clone or a snapshot of it, a temporary snapshot, and then continue on to the next part. And if we ever really, really mess something up and we get a dependency hell or something when you try to install a package, we just revert to the snapshot rather than trying to fix what we just messed up. That's good practice. Okay, so take a drink here and then we talk about the tasks you need to perform. Okay. So, task to perform. You got to install and you got to create a new CentOS 8 VM from your ISO as you did with your first assignment. Don't put your username in, make it Mike, and make this is a password, okay? I know it's a weak password, but again, this is just for practice. And when I use my script, I'm going to assume that there's a user called Mike and that there's a password called weakpass1. And the only reason we're doing that is because my script's assuming that those are the username and passwords. Just for simplicity purposes, in the real world, we would not make a password that weak. So it's imperative to set up the login and password correctly, just like I said. You got to grant Mike sudo access, and you can use that by adding Mike to the wheel group, as some people preferred, or you can use the way that I've suggested in the assignment, and I think it was assignment number 2. It was just a quick echo to sudoers.d. You need to ensure that an SSH key is set up so that that Mike does not have to log in using a password. You can log in through an SSH key, just like you would with your current VM. And we did that in one of the first assignments. Configure the network so it's remotely accessible using SSH. And that should be accessible right from the start, right? But so you probably won't have to really work with that too much. Create the users and groups that your boss sent to you in the email. Create a new directory called var share. Okay, that's where the primary parent file share directory is going to be. And then create the following directories and assign the correct permissions. So here are the directories and the team that should own that directory and the group that should own this directory and the people that should, be able to access these directories, and then the permissions for each directory. And then, so I'm just not going to go over all the details here. That's you can read over that and ask me any questions if you want. Set up special permissions on the requests on the folders that are in section 4 email from your boss. Why there's a double space there either. I'm just seeing these now. And then set up special permissions on the accounts for account security and administrative directories so that new files can be created in those directories it will automatically be assigned to the group that owns the directory. Remember that those special permissions bits? Remember those where you could set a special permission bit on the directory and stuff? Remember that? Remember the big S and the small s and all that stuff? That will help you there. Then you need to configure a custom log that logs all logins to a file named varlog logins. Remember our discussion on rsyslog? Okay, so I mean these are all things that you've done. I'm not asking you to do anything that is too crazy. I mean, yes, configuring all these weird ways that groups can access each other's files and everything is going to be the most complex part, but you're going to spend the most time there, right? But otherwise, it's still stuff you've done. It's just probably you probably got to think about that and plan that out a little bit more than what you've done in your assignments. And so install Cockpit on the server. You've done that before. And, configure the server automatically to update packages every day at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And you can do that using Cockpit, so that other administrators that aren't as smart as you guys can go ahead and make sure that they can administer the updates easily using Cockpit. Okay, so that's it. There's only 12 tasks here. I didn't make it too crazy. I know you have 2 weeks and other courses to deal with. That's why I'm not giving you an assignment this week. This is the assignment, and you have 2 weeks to do this. I will be available via Teams or email if you have any questions on any of this. Next class, you can ask me any questions as well. We can have a period next class where we can just have a Q&A session if you guys are struggling with any of these tasks. So that's it. Does anyone have any questions on this specifically? Does it seem pretty straightforward? I mean, it looks complex. It looks like there's a lot of steps and stuff, but this is typically what you would get in the real world. And I want to make sure that, everyone passes this course being able to do this stuff, right? No questions? Really, Yash? You're usually always asking the questions. Like, I made Yash and everyone else speechless. That's amazing. Yeah, you've done this stuff before. It's all in your assignments, Lily. And if there's something that you haven't done before that I'm asking you to do here, call me out on it. I want to be fair here. I'm not asking you to recreate the wheel. Like this is everything that we've taught, right? Yeah, just putting it all together. I know it looks like a lot. And as a new Linux administrator, this would be like, wow, whoa, hold on a second. But as if you go back to your other assignments, and you don't really even need to look through the presentations, really. I think if you just look through the assignments and what you've done before and remember what you did, I think that will be 90% of what you need. So that's why I was making you do the assignments as we go. So when we get to this part, it would be like, okay, well, I can't remember exactly how I did that, but let me look back at the assignment and see, oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, okay, I might just have to Google something or look up this one permission or look at a man page and I'll figure that part. That's fine. Yeah, it shouldn't be too hard. And, again, I'm not just saying go and sending you off to the wild here. I'm saying if you have any questions, come back to me and let me know. What I would suggest is that you do start, if you're not going to start this weekend, I would definitely start next week and have at least half of this done by, maybe getting up to like question 7 or 8, maybe even 7, because 7's the one that, or 7 and 8. 7 and 8 are probably the hardest ones. That's going to take you the most time. And then after that, it's just like random stuff like, setting up rsyslog and, setting up Cockpit and configuring automatic updates and stuff. Okay. We good? Sounds like we're good. All right, so no assignment this week. I really appreciate you guys coming here. It's only been an hour, so I'm going to give you 2 hours back to your time. And, hit me up on Teams, email, whatever you want, and, ask me any questions. Great. Well, thank you everyone very much. And, you guys, I hope everyone has a great weekend. It's probably the last warm week. I can't believe we're getting this warm weather in November. It's insane. What's going on? I mean, I'll take it, but holy man. Has anyone ever seen weather that is like in like like 15, 20 in the middle of November? That's like, wow. I hit you up with a question. Okay, someone's already got a question. Okay, yeah, sure. I'll check it out. Thank you, Lily. I appreciate that. So everyone have a great weekend. Get out there, enjoy some of this last little. Don't even know what the weather's going to be like, but I was walking around today outside with just this on, and it's like the middle of November, and I'm like, there should be snow on the ground by now. It should be ice. It should be like, um, this is insane to me. It feels like one one uh one year I went down to San Diego in December, and this was 2 days before Christmas. And so just like probably like a month from now. And I remember in San Diego, my dad and I and my son went down there for a fishing trip. And it was, I think, December 25th or 24th. It was Christmas Eve. And I remember walking down the street because we were going on the fishing trip the next day on Christmas Day. And I remember walking down the street and there's no snow and it was like 20 degrees out. And on the top of like buildings and stuff, there's like sleds and Santa Clauses and everything. And people are walking around, pouring out of the bars at 11 o'clock at night with tank tops on. And I'm thinking, and there's Christmas music playing. I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And that's what it feels like here in Canada right now, is that we can walk around with like t-shirt out. I saw on the weekend, people had like a tank top and shorts on. And I'm like, it's November. What's going on? It's crazy. Anyways, I hope everyone has a great weekend and enjoy it. And we'll see you next week. Oh, is it getting cold? Oh, no. Don't tell me that, Lily. I still have some stuff outside to do. So, all right. Well, thanks, everyone. Lily, I'll talk to you on Teams and we'll go from there. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I appreciate it. Have a great weekend.